when Lecrae is talking about this sort of like apolitical thing of I'm not, because he's sort of saying that I'm not left or right type thing. Yet this is this is Stacey Abrams. This isn't someone who's a moderate by any means. This is someone who I think it'd be right to say is a radical on the left, or on the more radical left. He's here. He's talking about in his post. He talks about how she's such an inspiration to his daughter. Is this not politically, a political ideology that he's promoting? Welcome to the Wokepedia podcast. The Wokepedia podcast is a ministry of enemies within the church. You can go to enemieswithinthechurch.com to, view the film, if you haven't, the documentary Enemies Within the Church, to learn more about how the woke infiltrated the church and learn what that means. What are the root issues? What are the causes? And, if you're here, you're learning a little bit more about how to see it and how to defend against it. This week, we're going to be talking about Lecrae. Lecrae is someone that is, he's popular, he's famous, and he's someone that's gotten attention when it comes to the question of, is Lecrae woke? So we want to answer that. We want to present reasons, we want to present evidence, things that you can look at and verify. Now, everything we talk about here, and then some, is also going to be on the website, but not on enemieswithinthechurch.com. That is a bit of an announcement. We'll be doing a fuller one later, but we're going to be getting a new website specifically for Wokepedia and some other things coming within the next month or two. So August, September of 2023, you should be seeing a new website going live. And look, the article on Lecrae will be one of the first things on there. Now, if Wokepedia is helpful to you, if it's useful, if this episode is useful, engage with it somehow. Like, comment, email us. If you're on a platform that you can't comment, email us, contactwokepedia@gmail.com. We want to get your feedback. We want to respond to it. We want to help make sure that everything is clear, that there isn't confusion, and to cover the topics that you're seeing in your churches, in your friends, in real life. And that's one of the reasons that we're talking about Lecrae, because he's a popular figure, not on the theological side. We talk about the theological a lot, but now we're talking about how does he describe himself? Because he's a rap artist. He is I think he describes himself as an entrepreneur, as an author, speaker, one of these, a musician that started in one category and now has branched into a lot of other things through his fame. So he's popular, especially among younger people. So if you want to understand the influences that are getting to younger people, this is how they're being educated more so than through traditional means, through school, through blogs, podcasts, things like this. Music is powerful, and it reaches younger people more so than even people who admit that understand, because they put teaching in there. They build influence. They are then followed, which is why they become a author, why they become a speaker, why they get given a trust that's probably more than any one person should be given, and definitely more than just a musician should get. Now, there are people that are more than just musicians, but understand people's strengths. Now, to help me with this, you might notice that if you're watching on video, don't have Sam here this week. There's another face. You might remember Jordan here from our episode on Moody. Has Moody gone woke? But Jordan is going to be helping us with discussing Lecrae. He's actually the author of the profile that we have on Lecrae. And so we figured that bringing him in would be a good thing. But Jordan, how are you doing today? And, are you ready for today's episode?
I am ready. I just hope I can do half as good a job as Sam does. He does great work. And I'm really excited. This is another issue that was really near to my heart, because when I was converted to Christianity in 2016, I was always interested in rap music even before I was a Christian, and so as a new believer, I got into Lecrae and specifically his old stuff. And his old stuff was really nourishing to my soul and had really good theology in a lot of the songs. And when I started to see the social justice movement and the woke stuff and started to see that this was contrary to scripture and saw that Lecrae was going along with it, it really broke my heart. And I think it's worth exposing for people that might not be familiar with this turn that he's taken.
Yeah. Now, that's actually a good question because a lot of people talk about someone, quote, going woke like it's a light switch. In particular, I've heard this a lot in regards to David Platt. Super popular at the end of the 2000s, early 2010s. Uh, his book Radical was in every youth group in existence. And a lot of people look at him like, oh man, he was so good. And then out of nowhere, he went woke. But that's not really how things work, is it? And is that Lecrae's story? Did Lecrae just flip a light switch at some point, or is there some evidence that he was at least leaning in a certain direction, a woke direction, from earlier on?
Yeah, there is, and there is definitely evidence early on that he was woke. I want to recommend that in September when the article comes out, that people go and read that, because there's a lot of evidences that we won't be getting to for the sake of time, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot more going on here than we'll be able to cover today. But just as a brief overview, Lecrae mentioned in the Why I Stay podcast, and it was a very obscure podcast that I found. Only a few hundred people actually listened to it, but Lecrae was a guest on that podcast, and on that podcast he says that his mother was a black nationalist, and that he grew up in that milieu, in that culture, and that he's always been, quote, pro-black. So we got two things from that he believes he's always been pro-black, and pro-black is defined in the context of a mother who is a black nationalist.
Yeah, that's kind of a concerning piece of evidence. Now, a lot of people come from backgrounds that they don't agree with. But to admit that you come from a certain background and then use a term that's obviously going to be linked to that background, to the context of that background, you kind of need to clarify what you mean. Now, I think in the context of the situation, it's relatively clear that in some form or another, his being, quote, pro-black is influenced by his mother's black nationalism. Now, we don't have the time to go into that, his background, into the background of what black nationalism is, all those kind of things. Again, go read the article. It's going to have primary source documentation on things. You can examine it. You can do a little bit more study. But getting into the question of Lecrae himself, he's responded to the idea that he's woke, correct?
Yes, he's responded, and he he has denied that he's woke. So it's not that he denies that he's woke, it's that the term is outdated, which we're going to get into in a second, but he denies being woke. He believes that conservatives have invented a new definition of woke, and to lump him in and to just dismiss him without actually dealing with the substance of what he's saying or anything like that, which nothing could be further from the truth. We want to go very precise and deep on what he's actually said and done.
Yeah.
And so, but I suspect that he would dismiss us as just, oh, you're just accusing me of being woke, just like all the conservatives do, just like all the Fox News pundits do, without that gives him a kind of a way out without having to address the substantive concerns that we have regarding all the evidences that he is woke.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think we'll see a little bit of a hint in as we continue going through some of these evidences. I think you'll see a hint of that. Of he doesn't want to define his position, but he's willing to accuse other people of misdefining it. Now, let's look at a little clip here. So this is not strictly to back up what you were just saying here. Now, it's not simply Lecrae doing it. It's actually someone else doing it in conjunction with Lecrae. But I think it kind of shows the point, and it also shows how other people defend him. So let's get this.
They've redefined it, and I don't even like it because it's an old term. It just meant be aware, keep your eyes open. That was it, and that was years ago. No, we don't
Stay
even use
woke.
that term anymore.
By the way, it's brilliant that the conservative side did take this and flip it to mean just all encompassing. Nowadays, if you're woke, you're pro drag queen hour at your local library, you're pro trans rights, you're pro men competing as women in men's sport. Like it just became a junk drawer term. It's like the sexual immorality in the New Testament. It just became a complete junk drawer term to just mean everything. And it's just really funny, but it's a way to kind of diffuse from a tactical standpoint, real conversations people were trying to have, right? And so I understand his frustration because one of my friends, Dr. Eric Mason, wrote a book called Woke Church, which had nothing to do with any of the stuff it's lumped in with that in terms of like the far leftist ideology.
So one thing I want to say right off the bat, on the very off chance that Ruslan sees this, I know he does not like people using clips of him. I've seen him react relatively strongly to that. Look, Ruslan, you're perfectly fine coming on here if you ever want to. We have disagreements with you. We would love to talk about those. But we're just trying to establish a point here. If you disagree with us, contact us. Contactwokepedia@gmail.com. Happy to talk with you. But you see, he did that, right? I mean, you mentioned, Jordan, you mentioned the idea that, conservatives have co-opted the term, which is something that I hear a lot. Conservatives co-opted the term. And I think we can both admit that there are people that have no idea what the term means and do use it as a blanket term for everything. But can you judge? Is that how you judge people? Do you judge people based on what a bad definition someone else used, or do you judge them based on the definition they're using? And I mean, the answer is obviously you judge them based on the definition they're using. In fact, isn't that what Lecrae and Ruslan are both saying? That they want their beliefs judged based on the word they're using. Well, Jordan, if we're going to be talking about definitions, can you give me a definition that's not just pulled out of thin air, but one that has some backing that we can, sink our teeth into?
I can give you a definition to sink your teeth into, and I will. So, critical theorist Laura Roy gives a definition of woke in her book, Teaching While White, on page 150. It says, quote, "The notion of getting woke is defined as being acutely aware of racial and social injustice. Not just awareness and acknowledgement of isolated incidents, but awareness from a position of understanding systemic and institutional racism." Now, I want to make it clear because definitions are important, and Ruslan is not defining what woke is. Okay, if that's not woke, then what is it? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's just being aware of what. And so there's no primary source material of what he is talking about, what Ruslan is talking about. So you just have to take Ruslan's word for it, Scout's honor, that woke doesn't mean adhering to systemic racism. It means all this other transgender stuff and all of this homosexual agenda stuff that maybe Lecrae doesn't subscribe to. But
Mm-hmm.
the a point I want to make is that one can be woke on one topic, but not woke on another topic.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, Lecrae is woke regarding race. According to the definition we just read, he believes in systemic racism, as we'll see. That does not mean that he's woke on other topics like transgender ideology.
Yep.
So, woke can apply to different topics, and just because you're not woke on every topic doesn't mean that you're not woke.
Yeah. And that's an important thing. And it kind of goes into a bit of the definition that we use here at Wokepedia, the short definition. Now, we do have a longer definition as well, but the quick definition that we use is woke is cultural Marxism as expressed through critical theory and its derivatives, such as critical race theory, queer theory, etc., i.e., the social justice movement. So you can be woke in that category of a cultural Marxist that's using critical theory, by using critical race theory, but not queer theory. AKA, you can be Black Lives Matter, fist in the air, but not LGBT, promoting. That's a different category of woke, but both still exist in. They're both elements of it. They both express it. They just are applying it to different areas. So it's a bad defense, but it's made possible by them not defining it. And all they're doing is poke holism. That's exactly what we were talking about in that episode, how the woke manipulate, poke holism. If I can just poke a hole in your belief, then I can reject the entire thing. That's why they're not going for the positive of, this is what I mean when I use this word. That's why they're going for, you're wrong, but I'm not going to tell you why.
Mm. So when we say Lecrae is woke, we mean he has a critical Marxist worldview regarding race. So what is a critical Marxist worldview?
Well, critical Marxist worldview, without going into, again, quick definitions, where, as expressed in modern times, it's going to be deconstructive. It's applied in a postmodern world, so it's now postmodern. It's that critical Marxism of social institutions, of familial institutions, of anything that it can be critical of. That's why you have the different expressions, whether it's critical race theory, i.e. critiquing the concept of race, which is kind of funny because they have to import race and then deconstruct it. But then, gender ideology, sexuality, feminism. And in particular, it's examine these as collectives, not as individuals. So this collective idea, we are going to critique it by which it simply means to deconstruct it, to challenge it, because it is oppressive. It restricts people. And that's the ultimate evil in a Marxist worldview, is to have any sort of restriction on you. Restriction is now oppression. What does that kind of sound like? That kind of sounds like the lie that Satan told in the garden. Oh, God, he doesn't want you to eat from that tree. He's oppressing you. He's restricting you from something else, something more. And if you question what God says, you challenge the created order, and you challenge the rule of law, you can grasp that truth and become free. Doesn't bring freedom, though. It brings enslavement.
Yeah, it brings slavery, and you know, as you're saying, anything that restricts you is bad. As applied to, capitalism, the belief that what you own is yours, they would say that that's unfair because some people have more and some people don't. Kyle,
Mm-hmm.
would you say that a belief pitting the haves against the have-nots would be Marxist?
100%. It can't be anything else. Someone's going to be really technical with me there, but no, that is a hallmark of Marxism, the idea of haves and have-nots, and that this is oppressive. The fact that it does exist or could exist is oppressive.
Okay, I want the audience to keep that in mind, that idea that in Marxism you have the haves versus the have-nots. The have-nots are oppressed. The haves are the oppressors. In this case, the have-nots are blacks and the haves are whites. And we need to dismantle capitalism in order to make sure that blacks have just as much access to wealth, resources, and power as whites.
Mm-hmm. It's exactly the same
Because
thing that
Lecrae's
Marx
about
was
to say
doing.
something that we're going to see.
Yeah, he is. But it's the exact same thing that Marx was doing when he was applying his theories to the family. One of the things he wanted to do in overthrowing capitalism is he thought that would overthrow the family unit as well. But so you can see these parallels just rapidly. But let's continue on. Now, we don't have a clip for this, but this is a song lyric from one of Lecrae's songs, "Can't Stop Me Now." So let's just read this quick because this is interesting. Now, Jordan, when did this song come out?
This song came out in, I believe, 2016.
So roughly the 2016 era. So here's the lyrics. And then they killed Tamir Rice, and they just go on with their life. They telling me, shut up talking about it, like I should just talk about Christ.
Kyle, you should be a rapper, man. You got skills.
There's a funny story I should tell you after this. But I read this, and so first when I read that, I was like, okay, I recognize the name, but I can't place it. And I know because of the context, this is someone who's a victim of a police shooting. And then I went and looked it up, and I was flabbergasted that this is the one that Lecrae would choose. So if you don't know, this is Tamir Rice is he's I believe 12 years old, correct? 12-year-old kid that was shot in Ohio because he was just alone in a park with an airsoft gun that had its orange safety cap removed. which is someone who did airsoft when they were, junior high school. One of the things that it was said jestingly, but it was a serious sort of jest. If you removed that orange safety cap, you will get shot because someone will think you're waving around a real gun. Because they are full size. They are designed to be real. They're most often metal, so they even shine and look like a real gun. Waving it around. There was some miscommunication with the 911 operator, but even then, all the police saw when they showed up was a person starting to raise a gun. And they shot him. And that is just, like, as a parent, that hurts to think about. I think about mistakes like that happening with my kids. Like, what are the important things I need to make sure that they know not to do? And that is painful tragedy. But it's not murder. It's not in any reality murder. But I know, Jordan, I know you in particular, because for people that don't know, Jordan is, well, I don't know what the proper term for someone that graduated law school, but still in the process of getting, getting through the bar exam is. But Jordan's in the process of becoming a lawyer. So I know you have some like legal thoughts on this of why it's so problematic that he brought that up, because you've made some good comments already on this. So I'm excited. So fill listeners in a little bit. Why is that so problematic that he would use this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think there is a more succinct way to put the situation I'm in right now, but yeah, that's about sums it up. So, soon to be lawyer, maybe we could call it soon to be lawyer. We pray and hope I pass the bar. But so, according to evidence submitted to a grand jury, Tamir showed the cops his gun, possibly in the attempt to show them that the gun was a toy. However, the cops didn't know that the gun was fake. So in that situation, they were forced to assume that it was real and was going to be fired at them. So they shot and killed Rice. Tragic situation. It's horrifying that it happened. I'm sure the cops were beside themselves. That I could only imagine. But the Cuyahoga County prosecutor decided not to prosecute this case because the office said, quote, it did not believe that any reasonable judge or jury would find criminal conduct. Now, despite the fact that there's no evidence that there was a murder here, there's no evidence that anything that there was an intentional killing with malice aforethought, which is what's required to be proven in order for there to be a murder. None of that was proven. And yet to this day, Lecrae maintains the narrative that Tamir Rice was murdered and that it was racially motivated and that the cops got away with it. And even worse than that, he claims that those who would rebuke Lecrae for pushing this false narrative are telling him to shut up about it, as if he's boldly standing for truth and conservatives are trying to suppress his bold stand that he's making. But the truth is, it is Lecrae who is spouting falsehood. Nobody's trying to suppress what Lecrae is saying. We're just saying what you're saying is factually incorrect. The cops' actions do not meet the legal standard for malice aforethought for murder. It cannot be proven. Murder requires you to have either intent to kill or at least a reckless disregard for human life. And here, when the cops see somebody pointing what looks to be a gun at them, they have to assume that the person has lethal intent and they have to meet it with lethal force. Yeah. So So this song is significant because it gives us a hint about the shift that Lecrae took away from theological rapping into this more social justice, socially conscious rapping. And he talks about in the song how he almost gave up his faith and had to, quote, deconstruct his faith in order to be able to keep his faith in Christ.
So I think we've established a little bit here about Lecrae and just willing to use kind of a super problematic example that he could, with very minor research, could have understood that this was not a good example. But let's continue on. Here's another clip of Lecrae that I think will, again, help you start to understand his mindset, his beliefs.
I think things started to shift for me when, one, I went on this major tour with a lot of artists and I saw the inconsistency. I saw the brokenness, and yet all these people were heralded as like, a picture of health. And yet there was so much brokenness behind the scene. And I wasn't there to judge them, but I was shocked that this was the reality. So that was disheartening to me. And that kind of made me jaded and realize that this picture that I think America has painted of the faith is not as clean as it is presented to be. From there, I wrestled with what happened with Trayvon Martin, and then I spoke up a little louder about Michael Brown after Michael Brown was murdered. And I didn't realize that there were so many different perspectives. I thought that everybody who was God-fearing was saddened by this murder. And I didn't realize there was a political ideals that went along with all of it. When I started speaking out about issues of justice, God's people did not love me. They did not embrace me. And what should have been a people wound became a God wound. These people had turned their backs on me, but I lumped them all in with God. And I said, God has turned his back on me because his people did. So I became embittered with all of it.
My goodness, there's so much I want to talk about in that. And I want to go on like a rant about how abusive the quote Christian music industry actually is, and how often people that are like not we have people that claim to be a Christian and then later come out and say, man, I'm not a Christian. I'm talking about there are record labels that know their artists are not Christian, yet label them as Christian to sell records to that demographic. It's abusive. But it's so weird the perspective he takes on it, and then he jumps into political activism. Yet, it's the other people that don't agree with his take are bringing in political ideals. But him, he's just having the every man's reaction. That everyone, it's gaslighting. It's 100% gaslighting. He's saying, I'm not doing this thing. You're doing that thing. And if you don't agree with me, you're being crazy.
Yeah, it's even worse than that. It's you don't love me if you don't agree with me on Michael Brown.
Not even just you don't love me, you don't love God. You're supposed to be a person of God, but you're not loving the body of Christ.
And you're a God. He said, if you're a God-fearing person, you should be saddened by the murder. Now, keep that word in mind, murder of Michael Brown. We're going to get into that in a second, but he's saying that he's accusing the body of Christ, who rightfully disagrees with him on Michael Brown, as not loving him because they weren't saddened about the murder and they pushed back on his false narrative about that. Mm-hmm. Now, I also want you to keep in mind that Lecrae here says that Michael Brown was murdered because we're going to read an excerpt from Lecrae's article on Billboard in 2014, 7 years prior to this previous clip. where he comments on the issue, and he says something very significant. So I want you to pay close attention.
Yeah. So this little excerpt from that Billboard article. So it says, so what's happened in Ferguson is not immune to bias. So even in 2014, he's saying it was racially motivated. And while I can't say who is guilty and who isn't, I can say that when you isolate this case, it's easy to overlook the systemic oppression that our country was built off of and how it affects everything. Big statement by 2014 Lecrae, even if it's not as direct on the Michael Brown situation as he was 7 years later.
Now, I just want to remind the audience of the definition of woke from critical theorist Laura Roy in her book, Teaching While White. She says the notion of getting white is defined as being acutely aware of racial and social injustice. And then she goes on to say awareness from a position of understanding systemic and institutional racism. So he just said that he believes in systemic oppression. Mm-hmm. That means, what does that mean? What do we call Lecrae? What is, according to the definition, what is Lecrae? He's woke.
Yeah, and because he's also putting it into he's saying if you focus on the individual case here, you'll miss the fact that this situation was caused by systemic oppression, and that systemic oppression itself is embedded in, it's part of the foundation of our country. Again, this is 2014 Lecrae, when pretty much no one was saying, oh, Lecrae's, back then it wouldn't have been woke, it might have said like a social justice warrior. No one was saying that. Not in any sort of large capacity. Yet he's just, he sounds like, someone from 2020 already.
Yeah, and he sounds like someone from 2020. And Kyle, as you mentioned, I just took the bar exam to become a lawyer, and that means I went through law school. And in law school, in your evidence class, one of the first things they teach you is that in a trial, when you put a witness on the stand, you cross-examining them. One of the best ways to kill that witness's credibility is something called impeachment by prior inconsistent statement. Now, impeachment by prior inconsistent statement basically says that didn't you say, you're saying you just said X, correct? Yes. But over here you said Y, correct? Yes. Therefore, we don't know whether you believe X or Y. Therefore, you cannot be believed on this point.
Yeah.
And so Lecrae, applying that to Lecrae, in 2021, Lecrae says Michael Brown was murdered. In 2014, Lecrae says, I don't know who's guilty and who isn't. Therefore, what is his honest belief? We don't know. He has not explained why he has changed his mind. Is there new evidence that he has seen since 2014 that would cause him to believe that Michael Brown was murdered? I highly doubt that. And here's why. If Lecrae just did a little bit of research, he would find, and I'm talking, when I say a little bit of research, I mean go to Google, type in Michael Brown report. The first link that pops up is Obama's Department of Justice, not Trump, Obama's Department of Justice, that said this, quote, the evidence when viewed as a whole does not support the conclusion that Wilson's uses of deadly force were objectively unreasonable under the Supreme Court's definition. Accordingly, under the governing federal law and relevant standards set forth in the USAM, it is not appropriate to present this matter to a federal grand jury for indictment, and it should be therefore closed without prosecution. Now, we don't have time to get into all of the mountain of evidence that exists that Darren Wilson was acting in self-defense and Michael Brown was attacking him when he shot Michael Brown in a deadly way, trying to steal his weapon. We don't have time to get into that, but it should be enough just that point right there, that this was Barack Obama's DOJ, Department of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
Obama famously has promoted the narrative of police being systemically racist in America.
Yep.
So it stands to reason that Obama's DOJ had a vested interest in finding any evidence of guilt on the part of Officer Wilson. But there was so little evidence of guilt and such a gigantic mountain of evidence of self-defense that even Obama's DOJ had to admit that Wilson was not guilty. But that doesn't stop Lecrae. Now, there's a common saying among lawyers, and I'm sure people have heard this on the news: a grand jury could indict a ham sandwich. Basically meaning that the standard of proof for indicting someone is so low that if there is even a shred of evidence of guilt, then a prosecutor is going to indict. So Officer Wilson is less guilty than a ham sandwich, yet Lecrae is disgustingly still defaming Officer Wilson as a murderer. Thoughts, Kyle?
Well, oh my goodness. So it doesn't matter to him. So it's ridiculous. It takes so little effort to find that out that it's disingenuous what he's doing. And in fact, again, going from I don't know to it was murder over the time frame when all the evidence was the reports are coming out, evidence was coming out, all this information is coming out, that's just massively reinforcing that this was not a murder. And you read the statement from Obama's DOJ, they're also not pinning a racial motivation on it either. So it's absurd to put both of those things on there, but it's consistent. It's consistent with his beliefs. It's consistent with woke ideologies. Just as you can have, again, it's an oppressor-oppressed relationship. Therefore, it's automatically a problem. It's a racist incident because the one with the power was light-skinned. The one without the power was dark-skinned. Therefore, it's racism. But beyond that, I don't think the evidence matters to people like Lecrae, people who have bought into these ideas of systemic racism, that because they've already jettisoned reality out. They're not looking at things objectively. They believe that you can have racism without a racist. You can have oppression without an oppressor. And this is kind of Lecrae saying you can have murder without a murderer. It functionally kind of comes down to that, this idea that because of the systemic issues, the power dynamics, the foundation of our country, all of these things, it's automatically a murder regardless of truth because of the context of systemic oppression. And it's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, no, evidence is evidence. Truth is truth. And to me, it just smacks of someone who's just abandoned truth.
Yeah, abandoned truth in the sense of abandoning objective reality, because this is radical subjective thinking that I am black, I believe he was murdered, therefore he was murdered.
Yeah.
The objective observer might come in and say, wait a minute, there's this mountain of evidence. There's this Obama Department of DOJ that was biased in favor of Michael Brown that still had no evidence to find him guilty. But the objective evidence does not matter because of this radically subjective worldview that basically says if you feel oppressed, and you have the right skin tone, then you're oppressed.
Yeah. Now, if you don't believe us that this is, I think we've already seen massive evidence already that Lecrae buys into the ideas of critical race theory, buys into these woke ideologies, these ideas of systemic racism and things like that. But let's hammer it home. Let's continue to hammer it home. So you have no doubt. So you can see we're not just cherry picking a comment. So let's look at a few more comments that he made.
So, one last quick point,
Yeah.
just to wrap this section up. Just to summarize, Lecrae's woke origins, according to him, is that he began to deconstruct his faith because he started to see that America was systemically racist, and then was criticized for his erroneous view. And that criticism and pushback that he got made him doubt God and made him deconstruct his faith. And then he came back stronger in his faith, so he says. I would question that, but that's according to Lecrae, his why the shift into wokeness took place.
Yeah, man, that reminds me of our episode on apologetics. Is it dead in a woke age? We talked about deconstruction in that episode, and particularly Jeff Childress. That's what he focuses on, is the idea of deconstruction, and he had some strong comments on that. It'd be fascinating to talk with him a little bit about Lecrae's, kind of examining Lecrae's deconstruction and quote reconstruction. But what did he reconstruct into? But again, let's move on to some of Lecrae's comments here that I think really help hammer it home.
Race in America, it's a social construct, you know what I mean, that creates these barriers for the haves and the have-nots, or for, some people matter, some people don't matter. And I feel like a lot of people don't want to deal with it. They feel like it's too complex, too complicated. If you inhaling toxic gas every day, but you're like, well, I don't really smell it, but you're still inhaling it. Even though you may not smell anything, it's still here. And I think that's racism in America. That's, the racial constructs in America. You may not see them like as obvious as you would think, but it's still toxic and it still affects people. So for me, I just wanted to help us walk through what those realities are and how people are affected even today. Will criticize you when you bring up race, or you bring up racism or systemic racism, and they'll criticize you and say, well, you just create more division. I'm like, no, I'm acknowledging and exposing what already exists. There's a difference. And so people will say, it's like some people will tell you, because you're talking about an issue that's divisive, you're being divisive. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, I'm talking about what's really real. And it's divisive to you because you don't want to talk about it. You'd rather ignore that particular situation. And so I think it's just hard, man. It's hard, specifically like in America, because we're so cultured into it. Like we wake up and breathe it and eat it every day. So people just they can't see it. They're like, I don't get it. Where's the racism at? What are you talking about? But you go around and think of the ethnicities that run most major corporations, that are behind most of everything that's going on in America. It took 45 years to get a African-American president, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of like, not 45 presidencies or whatever. But just it's those type of things that I think people don't realize, and just they don't contemplate, Like it's different when you are the minority. So like being a black man, I'm thinking about it all the time. When if you looking for movies to go watch and you pull up, your movie app to look at what movies are in the theater, be Asian or be Hispanic or be black and look for somebody who looks like you down that list. You're gonna see 15 movies. You're not gonna see anybody that represents your ethnicity.
There's so many moments where just my brain melts. And so, it's dense with things. I mean, obviously right off the bat, you should see all of the language he used that's just 100% in alignment with what it means to be a critical race theorist, what it means to be woke. But one of the key things he does is he accuses everyone else of being subjective. You guys are just kind of being subjective. You're not seeing the truth. And he says, I got the truth. Yeah, we've already seen that he doesn't have the truth when it comes to the two incidents that we've already looked at. And beyond that, he ends it, which we could talk about corporations, we could talk about Obama, but he ends it with movies. And he's like, man, if you're Hispanic or Asian or black, you're not going to see anyone that looks like you. And I'm like, what are you like? Go to list of top grossing, highest paid actors, top grossing actors, actresses over their career. All these things, you will find tons of people that are Asian. I mean, one of the richest actors, top 10 richest actors, Jackie Chan. Apparently, he's not Asian anymore. You know, Will Smith gets high up there too. Apparently, not black enough for Lecrae. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, he accuses people again. It's just gaslighting. Anyway,
Yeah,
Jordan.
and something that occurred to me that I thought of, but I didn't know how to quite articulate it, is that Lecrae, when he's on the airplane and in the thing, he was just coming off of a flight, so I think that he just had this experience and he was just trying to come up with an example and was like, movies, yeah, and it was a very clumsy example, but like it's a real window into his mind that when he goes to look for movies, he's looking for black characters. Like when I look for a movie, I'm looking for a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what the people look like. If it's a good movie, sign me up. So it's very odd. It's a very odd, and it shows it's a window into his worldview. So here, he says race in America is a social construct that creates these barriers for the haves and the have-nots. Now, what did we say earlier about Marxism? It pits the haves versus the have-nots. That's why we brought that up, because he explicitly he disavows being a Marxist. He's said in tweets that he's not a Marxist, but he is a Marxist. He just doesn't admit it.
Which is it's an important thing to point out, because a lot of people will say, I'm not X, Y, or Z. But that's why you don't just take their word at it. You look at their beliefs and how they apply them, the foundational principles they rest upon. And unfortunately, when he's spouting off stuff like this, it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and it talks like a duck, and it tries to overthrow the bourgeoisie in a glorious dictatorship of the proletariat like a duck. It's probably a Marxist duck.
Yeah, it's probably a Marxist duck, and they say if the shoe fits, wear it. And when it comes to being a Marxist, if the shoe fits, you must admit. So
that was terrible. No one's going to get that, but the people that do are just going to groan.
Anyone who grew up in the 90s or before will get that. If not, just look up Johnny Cochran. You'll find it. But okay, so here Lecrae surmises that systemic racism is like breathing toxic air that one is unaware of. And then he gives 3 examples. The fact that major corporations are run by white people, that it took a really long time for a black president to get elected. No credit that a black president was elected, just that it took a long time. And then that there are more white characters in movies than non-white characters in movies. Okay, so one would therefore have to ask, according to Lecrae's idea of systemic racism, is South Korea systemically racist in favor of Koreans? If you think about it, they have the majority culture. Their elected officials are Korean. Their shows and music feature majority Korean characters. Or is being the majority culture only a bad thing when it allows you to be a victim so that you can gain victim points by trying to right the oppression through some kind of redistribution scheme or reparations? such as jobs, political power, movie roles, or because we don't know the actual motivations of Lecrae, is he anti-white? That's another possibility, because he says he explicitly goes to watch movies based on the color of the skin of characters, and we know his background, his black nationalist background.
Yeah.
So that's one possibility. We don't really know the subjective motivations of Lecrae. It could be one, could be the other. We're not sure, but it is rather interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good point, because he's defining things in a way that, okay, how do you consistently apply this? Do you consistently apply this? And I mean, to me, and this is kind of just a broader point in general, what happens when you get what you want? Because that won't create equity. Eventually that'll unbalance things in your favor. Does that create a new oppressed class? Are you willing to talk about that conversation? But that's one of the biggest problems with collectivism. It's one of the biggest problems with grouping people into these collective identities, is there's no possibility of justice now. There's no possibility of balance. There's no possibility of anything other than an oppressor-oppressed relationship, because you can't look at the individual. It's what was the American dream? It's been mutilated over time, but the American dream was, you can come to this country and by your effort, you can pull yourself up. You're in charge of yourself and you have the opportunity. But when you put people into a collective, it's like the casteism in India. You have no mobility. You're stuck within your caste. That's what they're trying to argue for, is to put people into castes and then reorient the castes. I mean, should we call... I mean, it's not actually, but should we call it New Hinduism? Marxism is a religion, after all, and it's arguing for some sort of karma system where you need to get back at other people that have... I don't know, man. I can't... As much as I understand their belief systems, I can't logically grasp their belief systems because they're so incoherent.
Yeah, and when you said that, it made me think of the saying that the iron law of woke projection never misses, and because everything they accuse you of doing, they themselves do. So, for example, in this situation, they are accusing you of wanting to perpetuate a system in which white people are at the top, and then you got Asians. Oh wait, Asians, Asian. I don't know. And then you got brown people, and then black people, and they're all fitting into this cast. But that's not how it really works at all. It's just by our choices and by what we do with our effort, like you said, and our education and our background does play a factor, and having a family and that kind of stuff goes into it, creates inequality. Now, inequality is not inherently sinful. Ask Jesus, who gave the parable of the talents.
I was just thinking about the same thing.
So in the parable of the talents, you had one guy that was given 10, one guy was given 5, one guy was given 1. The guy with 10, the guy with 5 invested theirs. They got more. The guy with 1 buried his coin and didn't invest and didn't get any extra interest on his, and so gave the coin back to the master. And he said, "Why didn't you invest it? I'm going to take away your coin and give it to the guy who had 10. That doesn't sound very egalitarian. That doesn't sound very equal. They get different amounts, but it's not inherently sinful. This world is stained with the sin of Adam, and we can't all have everything we want. There is scarcity. Now, what are we going to do with that scarcity? Are we going to create a free system where people can create more stuff so that there's less scarcity? Or are we going to rob everybody of their stuff and so that there's more scarcity and there's less stuff to go around and then everybody's poor? Now, that was a rant. But back to the issue is the Marxists, the identity Marxists, want to create a inverted caste system in their own ideology, where since they believe white people are at the top, they want to bring them onto the bottom, and then put blacks on the top and brown people right under them, and so they want to actually create a caste system while accusing us of creating a caste system. So iron law of woke projection never misses. Took me way too long to make that point, but we got there.
I think you clarified a lot of things in that, because but that's why we talk about this kind of stuff. That's why we talk about wokeness. That's why we look at people and examine their beliefs and their ideologies, influential people, because Lecrae is influencing a lot of people. He's influencing a lot of young people that might not have thought about these kind of things. And when they hear someone that they trust and they look up to say, just like matter-of-factly, yeah, this is true, and if you don't believe it's true, you're giving into political ideologies, and you're giving into subjective things, and you're giving into all these things without ever giving evidence as to why his position is true. And I'm talking like good, solid evidence, not just, movies. Yeah, that supports my cause when it objectively does not. They're buying into it. That's why we talk about this. But let's continue on. Let's give you some more. I think we've already closed the lid on this coffin, but there are some more nails we can drive in if you really want to be sure, especially if you're someone, I really hope you are, someone who doesn't agree with us and is examining the evidence, because that's why we provide it. But let's jump ahead a little bit and talk about another clip. This is from the same interview, the same video, but it's going to help clarify a couple things. But before we look at this clip, let's talk about something that we've functionally been discussing through this. Now, we have a whole episode. We actually have 2 episodes, technically, on this, on standpoint epistemology. Now, if you don't know what standpoint epistemology is, you should go watch those 2 episodes. I think they do a great job of explaining things on a pretty technical level, but still very accessible. But if you're not sure what it means, you've heard of it in 2 different things. One, my truth. If you've ever heard that phrase, that's someone talking about standpoint epistemology. The other thing is lived experience. You have to listen to someone's lived experience to understand their truth. Well, truth isn't subjective. It's objective. There is truth in this world. But that's not what standpoint epistemology believes. It believes that someone's standpoint, their position in life, and all the factors that create that influences how they understand truth, and their truth is valid. If you do not have their same standpoint, you cannot know their truth. You can only get a shadow of truth. But truth is not locked in our standpoint. It is locked in a standpoint. It just happens to be locked in God's standpoint. Because God...
Can you give a few examples of some standpoints that must be listened to?
I can give you 10. And if you want to go to Exodus, they're very well listed in a nice format, a 10-point list. I know 10-point lists are really popular nowadays. They're called the 10 Commandments.
No, I meant according to the woke, not objectively.
According to the woke. Okay. No, according to the woke, you must figure out where someone ranks on the hierarchy of oppression and listen to their standpoint. So if you are a woman, only you can know the experiences of what it is to be a woman. A man can know nothing about that. So the man must listen to the woman in anything in regards to women. Now, this is one thing I want to make clear, because I think this is something that people miss. That's not saying that there's a difference between intellectual knowledge and experiential knowledge. I can understand what it's like when a relative dies, but that's a lot different than actually experiencing a relative die. Nothing makes you prepared for that gut punch. But that doesn't mean that I have different, I didn't know truth until my grandpa died. That's not how it works. So you got to, if you're a woman, you have to listen to the woman. But if you're a woman and there's another woman and she's a black woman, or at least she's a darker skin tone than you, she's more oppressed. You must listen to her standpoint because she knows truth that you can't know. And then if, you can add layers onto that. So it's, where do you rank in the hierarchy of oppression? Listen to someone that's more, quote, oppressed than you.
Okay. So if a black woman is standing in line at a Starbucks, gets to the front, and the clerk says, "Oh, I like your hair." The black woman is very well versed in intersectionality and thinks that was racist, what she just said, that my hair looks nice. I interpret that. I feel that that's racist. So you're saying that I can't question that?
No, you can 100% question that.
No, I mean, in their worldview, I can't question that, right?
And I was about to clarify. In the woke worldview, you can't question that because that's her lived experience. That's her truth. What it comes down to is subjectivity. She interpreted it as racist, and because she's more oppressed, you can't question that. You can't question her experience because truth is not rooted in what did happen. Truth is rooted in what I feel happened. AKA, that's why Lecrae can just be like, yeah, despite the evidence, Michael Brown was murdered.
Yep.
But let's look at a clip where, because I think we've already kind of talked about that, but let's look at a clip that clarifies that of Lecrae.
And I think that's part of the issue is you just can't see it unless you walk in those shoes. Like, you can't sit here and ask me, what's life like in China? I don't know. I don't live in China. I don't experience the things that people experience in China. So it's ignorant for me to be like, that doesn't happen, or it's not real. It's like, well, do you really have these relationships? And then, you look at 95% of people on social media, their friends look just like them. You know what I mean? So it's like, when was the last time you had in-depth conversations with people of other ethnicities and races and whatever, and asked them what their day-to-day realities are like, And so,
I mean, that clip, if it was just that clip, I'd be like, okay, that's kind of an ignorant take. But I hope you can see how it's combining with some of the others that we've already shown to show how Lecrae is applying standpoint epistemology. You cannot question his analogy. I would pass it off as just a ridiculous analogy. You can't know what it's like to live in, what life is like in China. I can go read articles and books and all sorts of things. I can go talk to people who moved here from China as well, and then verify what their claims. I can objectively investigate it, and then I can come to a conclusion of, I don't know every detail, but I know what it's like. That's like saying that Adam and Eve couldn't know what right and wrong was until they sinned. They experienced sin. No, God told them what right and wrong is, And they had the understanding and capability to know that it was what? Wrong to eat from the tree. Yet they did it anyway. But he's saying, no, no, no. Again, it goes back to the lie in the garden. Because if standpoint epistemology is true, then they could have no possible way of knowing it was wrong to eat from the tree, even if God told them, because they didn't have that experience. They didn't have that lived experience, that reality yet. Bonkers. Anyway.
Yeah, it is, and something just occurred to me. You know, I've been through that clip a few times, and it just occurred to me that his example actually makes more sense until you apply it to what he's actually talking about. Because what he's talking about is the experience, the lived experience of oppression of black people in America in relation to white people who might deny the reality of systemic racism. And he says it's like someone from China telling you what it's like in China. So what he's saying is that the white experience is so far removed from the black experience in America, so different, that it's like being in another country. And because you don't have access to that country, you don't know what it's like. And
Yeah.
I just caught that, and that's kind of that in a nutshell standpoint epistemology, because he's saying you can't access those truths, so you can't say that doesn't happen. You can't say that's not real. You have to listen, shut up, listen, and believe.
Yeah.
By faith, what the oppressed tell you.
Yeah, it hurts. It really does, because it's sowing division. Now, it's not because what he's talking about, he's talking about realities that are divisive. No, it sows division because he's creating barriers that didn't exist between individual people. And he's saying, when I was in elementary school, I had a friend, and I thought he was really cool kid. We only hung out a few times, but it was kind of one of those friendships. You're like, man, I can see this going somewhere, because this is a cool guy, and I want to hang out with him. And then I changed schools after that, and he changed schools too. I think his parents might have been military, moved away. Never saw him again. Looked at a yearbook and was kind of like reminiscing about my friends. And, I was like 16 at the time, looking back, and I flipped open the page, and I was like, oh, EJ was black. I had no idea. Someone had to tell me that there was a difference between, now people have made this point a million times, but someone really had to enter that category into my mind. That category that there are black people, there are white people, and they are different and separated. And I can tell you, it was not racists that introduced that into my mind. So it absolutely drives me bonkers when they try and create these divisions. They try and, because what Lecrae's doing is he's running up to third grade Kyle, and he's running and stepping between me and my friend and going, nope, you are a white kid. You are oppressing him. And I'm like, dude, are you serious? You're the problem, man. You're the one that's causing the division.
Yeah. And not only is he doing that, he's sowing division between you and your friend, but he's also telling you that you must believe everything that he teaches your friend about oppression. And you cannot question that. You have to believe it. So objective reality, evidence, facts, logic, reasoning, throw it out the window. There's no check your brain at the door when it comes to the woke. You have to believe the lived experience of oppression of these people according to that worldview.
Yeah. It frustrates me. Again, it frustrates me on an intellectual level. It frustrates me on a personal level. It frustrates me on an emotional level. It frustrates me on a spiritual level. It frustrates me with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. Because it really does. It attacks all of those things.
It does.
And functionally, it's attacking those and breaking them down in relationship to God as well, as we can see by Lecrae's deconstruction. But let's kind of wrap things up on a note of just kind of looking at, we're going to rapid fire 2 clips, just talk about them a little bit and kind of give you a couple points to end on so you can, again, really get that full view that Lecrae is, by every metric, woke.
Yep.
By our definition of the word, by definition from a woke author, he is.
And these clips are going to make the point that Lecrae metaphorically criticizes the left with a careful scalpel while criticizing the right with a chainsaw.
Yep. And does some interesting manipulative things in that, but let's watch.
So what we're upholding are biblical perspectives. Now, I know some people will say, hey, the conservative or the Republican Party upholds the lives of the unborn and some particular conservative moral values. And then others would say the Democratic Party or parties of the like uphold ethical values such as love your neighbor as yourself, the justice of the oppressed, which is all throughout the Old Testament and Amos. And so what ends up happening is that these two perspectives, where they're supposed to be working together, end up being combative. And people choose a side as if there's a moral high road on either particular end. And what I would say is that the moral high road is realizing that neither one of them fit neatly into God's agenda, and that God has an agenda which encapsulates both. I love my brother Justin Giboney, who represents the AND campaign, where he talks about moral responsibilities and social justice. And I know people hate the term social justice, but when we're saying social justice, all we're saying is exactly what the Good Samaritan said. It's taking care of the needs of the marginalized, the disenfranchised, and the oppressed.
Yeah. Let's not even comment on that one. Let's just watch the next one. I mean, they mirror each other greatly.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Like when you care about unborn babies, all of a sudden now you are politically pro-life and conservative. When you care about the lives of African Americans, you are politically progressive or liberal. And that's stupid, because you can care about unborn babies in the Black community at the same time, because God does. And it's not because you're choosing a political agenda.
Again, it's one of those. He does a really good job with few words, packing in so many things. You know, obviously, many things that people they're going to only pick on the surface level. But when you kind of understand the ideologies he's going behind, they're going on behind the scenes, you just go like, why? What? But let's just do this immediately to add some context. When Lecrae is talking about this sort of like apolitical thing of I'm not, because he's sort of saying that I'm not left or right type thing. Yet this is Stacey Abrams. This isn't someone who's a moderate by any means. This is someone who I think it'd be right to say is a radical on the left, or on the more radical left. And he's here, he's talking about, in his post, he talks about how she's such an inspiration to his daughter. Is this not politically, a political ideology that he's promoting?
For those who don't know, just for context, Stacey Abrams, if you Google Stacey Abrams platform, there's a website called Stacey Abrams on the Issues, and you can look this up. She believes in abortion for all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason. She believes in gay marriage, which is what I call gay marriage. She believes in transgender people being allowed to compete in women's sports. So, and Lecrae, remember Ruslan earlier, the Lecrae, apologist, said that Lecrae opposed these things. Well, if he opposed these things, then why is he promoting a candidate who's for these things without any qualification at all?
Yeah.
So, just to give context.
And that's pretty major, because he's saying, hey, here's all this stuff. I don't agree with all this stuff. I'm going to be defended. I'm going to use that as part of my defense, is that I don't agree with these things. Yet, I'm going to promote someone who explicitly promotes all of those things and is opposed to ending abortion. And, again, has a more radical view on it than many who are pro-abortion. So that's a pretty crazy take. And then he's like, oh, man, but I want to... But, here's another image of Lecrae. And if you look at you might not be able to say it, because, if you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be pretty compressed. If you're listening, you have an advantage there because you're creating a picture in your mind. But there's a podium behind him. Health, jobs, justice. Warnock. He's singing, so it's like a political rally for this Warnock guy? Who's this Warnock guy?
Yeah, Raphael Warnock. He's he claims to be a pastor. Again, just like Stacey Abrams, he believes in. He's a senator, and he actually, when he got elected, he broke the tie and gave the Democrats the majority. So we can thank Lecrae for helping there be a Democrat majority in the Senate, Mr. Apolitical. But Raphael Warnock has the same radical view on abortion as Stacey Abrams. All 9 months for any reason whatsoever. It's just birth control. You can tear up a baby limb from limb at 9 months. Tear up a baby limb from limb, crush its skull. No problem for Raphael Warnock. Just totally barbaric position. And in addition, he promotes the gay agenda and so forth, just like Stacey Abrams. So these are a couple of very radical politicians. These are not center-left people by any stretch of the imagination. They're radically on the left, and Lecrae is promoting these people. So again, we have to ask, if Lecrae is not a political guy, then why is he doing this? I don't see him I don't see him taking pictures with a conservative like Clarence Thomas and saying, you're an inspiration to little black boys everywhere. But he is doing it for Stacey Abrams. So
he's doing it for
that says something.
Yeah. Well, but this is where that whole, because he's in both those clips of Lecrae that we listened to, he's trying to pull this, Christ, not politics type thing, this political neutrality that's based on the idea that, I'm following God, not. But there's so many things wrong with that, and it just falls flat on its face so hard. Because, what? So at the beginning, and he does this in both, he matches a belief, and then he says, if you hold this belief, you are attached to this party. Now he's saying that's what other people do, but he's also functionally doing it as well. He's saying that beliefs connect to political ideology. Then he ends by stating that you can hold a belief with it not being a political agenda. So one, I mean, we could talk about pietism, and again, the negative separating the different spheres of your life so that your faith doesn't interact with your political life. But I mean, it's frustrating because not only is this a contradiction, but it betrays that he himself has an agenda, and it's one that's political in nature. And if you need confirmation of that, again, pictures of him promoting radical progressives, not just not center left people, not classical liberals, radical progressives.
Yeah, he's promoting radical progressives.
Yeah.
And he's so the quote was a couple minutes ago. Just to recap, Lecrae's disagreement with the left, he says, is he believes in the rights of the unborn, and he believes in, or he characterizes the right as believing in certain conservative moral values, not really enumerating what those are, but just saying that they have them. And then, by contrast, Lecrae implies that the left loves their neighbor, so they adhere to commandments 5 through 10 of the 10 commandments. They uphold justice, so conservatives don't uphold justice, but liberals do. And then he says that they care about the lives of black people. So that implies that conservatives don't care about the lives of black people. And this shows Lecrae's disdain for conservatives. He thinks conservatives are at best indifferent and at worst hateful towards non-whites. Never does it cross his mind that we might, maybe, perhaps, we care about non-whites and whites, and we desire to love our neighbor, but we have a disagreement about the narratives you're promoting and the policies you're promoting.
Well, she's already stated that if you disagree with, on the Michael Brown thing, if you disagree with him, then you're pushing a political agenda. But if you agree with him, then you're just seeing what everyone can clearly see in reality.
Right.
It's gaslighting.
It is fascinating, and it shows that, again, Lecrae only is concerned about nuance and charity and giving people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the left. When it comes to the right, he imputes the very worst of motives.
Yep. And granted, you have to pay attention because he's not doing it in the positive. He's not asserting that they don't care, but he is asserting that he's drawing a contrast. One side does this, one side does this. The implication is the other side doesn't. So when you do that and you lay all these positive things on one side, what does it really come down to? He says, functionally, what he says is my political philosophy is pro-life evangelicals for Biden. That's his political philosophy. I'm going to be on the radical left, but against abortion, maybe. I don't know if Lecrae is actually against abortion or if that's just a talking point that you have to say.
Yeah. It's even less courageous, or I don't know if courageous is the right word. It's less cowardly for the pro-life evangelicals for Biden, because at least they're admitting that they're for Biden.
That is true.
Lecrae is hiding behind this pretended neutrality.
Yeah.
While still holding to the same position.
Which, again, if anyone does that to you, they're selling you a bill of goods, man, because the second we live in a country that has a political system that engages its people. We vote, we have a voice, we're encouraged to use it to be a good citizen. You must engage civically. That's why voting is called our civic duty. So the second you do any of that and you have a standard, you say, this is my standard for who I'm voting for. They must check X, Y, and Z. That's called a political ideology, aka a political agenda. So again, someone that says I'm neutral, well, the only way you can be neutral is not vote. But even that's making a statement, a political statement. So again, they're trying to sell you an ideology by claiming they don't have an ideology to make you lower your guard. That's what Lecrae is doing. He's trying to get young, impressionable kids to lower their guard so he can then infect them. He is the toxic gas.
Yeah, it's absolutely toxic, this ideology that he's pushing, and it breaks my heart to see him doing it. He gave, like I said, in his early career, so much good stuff, and yeah, it's really sad to see, and we need to pray for Lecrae, pray for his soul. If he is saved, we don't know the state of his heart. Obviously, only God knows. But if he is saved, we pray that God would show him the error of his ways. He would turn from that and come back to a biblical understanding of objective reality, of not engaging in this covetous mentality, and recognizing that we ought not to show partiality on the basis of another person's skin. We should. Yeah. I heard someone say somewhere that we should be, I don't know, judging people on the content of their character. Just throwing that out there. But pray that God would show him his error, and that he would turn. And if he's not saved, that God would save him according to his glorious grace. I understand we were pretty hard on Lecrae today. If you disagree, you might think, I'm being a jerk and, really going hard at Lecrae and trying to tear him down and being really negative on him. And I understand that it could sound that way, but you got to remember, 1 Corinthians 13, love does not rejoice with wrongdoing, it rejoices with the truth. Mm-hmm. So if I love Lecrae, then I need to not rejoice in his wrongdoing, but tell him the truth that he's going the wrong direction, and in hopes that he would come back. Yeah. And that's one thing. And as you said with Ruslan, we want to also extend the invitation to Lecrae. He's welcome to come on the show, talk about the content of the episode and any quotes that we've looked at today. And just know that if you are, on the very small chance you're listening, Lecrae, we do care about your soul, and even if we may have come across as harsh, we do care about you, and we want the best for you. But more importantly, we want what's best for the body of Christ. And more important than that, we want to see God glorified and not dishonored.
Indeed we do. And that's why we do what we do. We don't want to be just naysayers. We don't want to be just random voices. We want to give you tools to which to view the world, hopefully from a more and ever increasing biblical worldview, to know what errors are out there, why they're wrong, not just say they're wrong, but give you reasons why they're wrong, give you evidence for you to look into. And yeah, it's our Wokepedia promise. Anyone that we ever discuss on here, that's an invitation, open invitation to come on the show. And that's not just to beat you up. That is to discuss. We are confident, very confident in our position. So we are willing to have discussions with people that disagree with us. But, in the end, unfortunately, Lecrae is woke. At least he's bought into these ideologies and they have control of him. And we have to face the reality of that situation. Again, he's influential. He's influencing younger people, older people as well. I mean, he's become a lot more popular in a lot more different places, and we have to address the teaching. The teaching is quite rotten. But we hope this episode has been useful and helpful. If it has, share it with others. Share it with others, not to make fun of Lecrae, but to see truth elevated. Share it to help people that might be fans of Lecrae see that, this guy's not a good person to follow. But if you need to contact us, you can contact us at contactwokepedia@gmail.com. You can also engage with the content wherever you find it, whether that's Spotify, on Rumble, or on YouTube. You can subscribe to those different things. You can comment. You can share. We appreciate it, but we hope that you're doing it because it's actually helpful. And if it's not, let us know. We'll take you seriously as we can, but we can't change the truth. So until next time, not until next time. Why do I keep doing that? Because I don't ever want you to go woke. So remember, don't go woke.